My name is Mariano Avila. I'm the inclusion reporter for WGVU, your public media station. So we're PBS and NPR in West Michigan. And it is my distinct honor to introduce a speaker who does what I think many of us should be doing, what some of us probably wish we were doing, but which he is uniquely suited to do. Julissa Arce is a writer, an immigrant rights and education advocate, and a CNBC contributor. She is the co-founder and chairman of the Ascend Educational Fund, a college scholarship and mentorship program for immigrant students, regardless of their immigration status, their ethnicity, or their national origin. Julissa is also a board member for the National Immigration Law Center and College Spring. She is the former director of public affairs at Define America, a media organization that uses the power of story to change culture around immigration and citizenship. Prior to becoming an advocate, she built a successful career on Wall Street working for Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch, and had seemingly achieved the American dream. And yet she was, according to some, not part of what defined America. So here to speak to us today is Julissa Arce. Please join me in giving her a welcome.
I should have worn my heels so I could be a little taller to see you all. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know that it's a rainy day today and you could have chosen to stay at home. So I thank you for being with me tonight. What I want to do today is I just want to share some stories with you. I want to share 2 or 3 different stories with y'all, and at the end there'll be time for questions. So if there's something that I say that I didn't explain well enough, or you're just more curious about, I know that there are a group of you in the audience who have already read the book, so thank you for that, and feel free to ask any questions about things you read in the book as well at the end. So the first story is when I still lived in Mexico. I lived in Mexico until I was 11 years old, and when I was 11, my parents told me that America was my new home, which was fine, except that I didn't know whether I would fit into this new country. And one of the biggest reasons why I didn't think that I would fit in here is because I had never seen someone that looked like me be called an American. When I grew up in Mexico, I grew up watching Dennis the Menace, and it was my favorite cartoon. I hear some laughs because you guys have probably seen it too. And one of my favorite episodes in the cartoon is when the mean neighbor's house gets taken away on wheels. So I had this idea that Americans lived in homes that could move, in mobile homes, and I wanted to grow up and move to the States to join my parents and live in a mobile home. And then I got a little bit older and I started watching Beverly Hills 90210. And so my dreams very quickly escalated. Now I live in Los Angeles, so I feel like I'm a little bit closer to that dream, but not there yet. But the thing that stood out to me about these television shows that I watched is that everyone looked the same. Everyone was beautiful, and everyone was rich, and everyone was white. So when my parents said, America's your new home, I just thought, can someone who looks like me, can they be called an American? Can they be considered an American? And frankly, my parents, when they use this word American, Americano, it was always to refer to white people. They never used the word American to refer to anyone that was Hispanic, even if they were born here. So I just didn't know whether I could fit in. Well, then I moved to San Antonio, Texas, where there are more Mexican restaurants than there are McDonald's. And a lot of the people that I went to school with in 6th grade looked just like me. So then I thought, okay, maybe I can actually be part of the makeup of the fabric of this country. Maybe someone that looks like me can actually be an American, and maybe my parents just have it all wrong. I started watching television here in the US and shows that had people that looked like me. But there were a few problems with the shows that I watched. Even though there were people on television that looked like me, they were often represented in very specific ways. I never saw someone that looked like me who was the doctor or who was the lawyer or who was just like one of the characters from Friends who I don't know what they did other than hang out. Like I wanted to see someone on television that was just hanging out that looked like me. But we were often portrayed as people who were criminals, who were gang members, and who were maids. And I have to say that there is absolutely nothing wrong with being a maid. My mom would have done anything to provide for our family, and it's really hard and honest work. The issue with it, though, is that when that is the only image that we see, that becomes our role model. That becomes what we aspire to. That becomes not only what other people think about us, but what we begin to think of ourselves. So I was growing up, and then I was looking at these images, but at the same time, my mom was pumping me up on the American dream. She kept telling me that in order to achieve the American dream, you had to do two things. You had to stay out of trouble, and you had to work hard. And if you did those two things, if you worked hard and you stayed out of trouble, then anything was possible in this country. My mom loves America. She loves this country so much that she tells me, Mija, even bacon tastes better in America. Okay. My mom is a pescatarian, except for the times when she eats bacon because she loves it so much. So she loves this country, and she kept pumping me up on the American dream. And then I got really excited because I started watching Saved by the Bell. And in Saved by the Bell, we had a character that looked just like me, and he was an all-American kid. He was a football player, he was popular in school, all the girls liked him. I mean, he was the definition of American. His name was Arce Slater, and I found out that he actually didn't know that he was Hispanic. He didn't know that he was Mexican. And it wasn't until the college years, Saved by the Bell, the college years, which I don't blame you if you didn't watch it. I don't think a lot of people did. But it wasn't until Saved by the Bell, the college years, that Arce Slater discovers that he is, in fact, Chicano. So let me show you.
Es un bonito día, ¿qué no?
Excuse me?
There are all sorts of things that are wrong with this video, by the way. For example, that you have to speak Spanish in order to be like a real Latino. I've never understood that. There's also the part where your last name has to be Sanchez or Garcia, and Slater can't be a Latino name because, by the way, Latinos, we have all sorts of different names and we look all sorts of different ways. And so there are all sorts of things that are wrong with this video. But what I got out of the video, again, was finally seeing someone that was portrayed in a positive light. A Latino, a Mexican-American who was finally portrayed as someone who could be all-American. But then he didn't even know that he was all-American, right? But it really made me feel like I belonged somehow. And I started to feel, when I was, as I was growing up and I was becoming a teenager, I started to feel American. I had been living here for a few years. I finally learned how to speak English. I remember the first time when I had this dream, and in my dream I was speaking English. And I woke up the next morning and I was so afraid that I would forget how to speak Spanish that I just watched Spanish television all day because I was so freaked out that I was dreaming in English. That was a new thing for me. And for those of you who have learned how to speak a different language, you really know you're becoming fluent when your dreams, you start speaking in a different language in your dreams. And that's what happened to me. And just around the time that I was beginning to feel American, I was also very much wanting to hang on to my Mexican roots. And one way I wanted to do that was to have my quinceañera. And if you don't know what a quinceañera is, just picture a wedding without the groom or without the bride, and that is a quinceañera. That's how big these things are. And I know there was someone I met earlier who had a quinceañera recently, so you're a very lucky girl to have gotten one. I didn't have a quinceañera because my mom revealed to me that I couldn't go to Mexico anymore. And I couldn't go to Mexico anymore because the visa that I used to come here expired, and that's how I became undocumented. And it's interesting to me that when we talk about the issue of illegal immigration into the country, we tend to focus it on one geographic area, that being the Mexico-US border. And we think that by throwing out really simple solutions like building a wall, that that's going to solve everything. Well, I came here on a plane. So I'm not really sure how high this wall is going to be because I would still be here. And in fact, 40% of the people who are in the country undocumented never crossed the border illegally. We came here on some sort of visas that later expired, and we find ourselves undocumented in this country. I was 14 years old when I found out that I didn't have the right paperwork to legally be in the country. And to be honest with you, that night when my mom told me that I was undocumented, essentially, I cried. I cried that night, but I cried about not having a party. I wasn't crying because I understood what it meant to be undocumented. I was 14 years old. I was a cheerleader, and I was speaking English, and I was hanging out with my friends, and I was thinking about going to high school and started to thinking about college. Like, being undocumented was not something that I understood. But I did understand what it meant to be undocumented once I started applying to colleges. Because I believed my mom when she told me about this American dream, and I believed my mom when she told me about the formula that I needed to follow. And I was incredibly, deeply disappointed to find out that it didn't matter how hard I worked, and it didn't matter how much out of trouble I stayed, because the American dream was just not available to me. And it wasn't because I didn't work hard enough. It was because I didn't have a 9-digit social security number. I graduated from high school in the top 5% of my high school class. I had all the extracurriculars you could potentially imagine and that a college would find desirable. I had the SAT scores. I had checked all of the boxes. But every single letter that I received was a rejection letter. Every single one of them. And it was because I didn't have a 9-digit social security number. My senior year in high school, my mom also suffered a really terrible accident that I talk more about in the book. And my parents had made this decision that they were going to go back to Mexico so that my mom could get the medical care that she needed, because being undocumented means we didn't have access to health care. And I know there is a lot of misconceptions about undocumented people sucking everything out of the system and getting benefits. And the reality is that undocumented people do not qualify for most public services because we're undocumented, which means we don't have documents to present to receive those types of benefits. So my parents had decided they were going to move back. And at the same time that my mom was really sick, a really miraculous thing happened. And it's still hard for me to believe now when I think about what's going on in Texas today. But in 2001, Texas became the first state in the US to allow undocumented students to go to college, to attend colleges, to pay in-state tuition, and also to receive state financial aid. 2001 was the year that I graduated high school. So it really was the perfect timing, because I graduated from high school not knowing if I was going to go to college, with my mom very sick. And then I found out that I could, in fact, go to college. And I was admitted into the University of Texas at Austin. And I had, it was just really a miracle that this happened, and that it happened in a place like Texas. And I'm always encouraged by that, because I think even in the most unlikely places, when there are people willing to put on the work, when there are people willing to do the advocacy that it requires and the organizing that it requires, we can actually pass policies and laws that help people. In this case, to help undocumented students like myself be able to go to college. And I wish we had made more progress, but today in the US, there are only a dozen or so states that allow undocumented students to go to college. Michigan is not one of those states. But certain universities in all the states that you see that are white, there are certain schools and universities that do still allow undocumented students to go to college. And it really is up to the Board of Regents to allow that. In other states like South Carolina and Alabama and Georgia, the laws that have passed actually make it a crime. It makes it illegal for an undocumented student to try to enroll in those universities. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine getting a higher education being a crime? And you've done all the work in high school to be able to go to a college, to be able to continue your education. But if you live in one of those states, it can actually be a crime. And that's what's happening on that side of the country. As I said, I got very lucky. I was very fortunate because I was able to go to college. And when I was in college, I try to think of myself just as any other student. I try not to let my immigration status dictate how I was going to live my life. But even when I tried to do that, there were certain things that I just couldn't get away from. My family had a funnel cake business, so I used to take the Greyhound bus from Austin to San Antonio and on the weekends, and I would sell funnel cakes. And then on Sunday night, I would have all this cash from the funnel cakes I sold, and stuff the cash in my backpack and go back to Austin with money to pay for my tuition payment, with money to pay for my rent, to pay for my books, and maybe get a slice of pizza or something. And the funny part about this is that you might think like, why didn't you put this cash in the bank? And I would have loved to put this cash in the bank. But undocumented people at that time, we couldn't open bank accounts because we couldn't get IDs that had our names on them we couldn't get an official ID. Therefore, I couldn't open a bank account. So I literally had to stuff my cash under my mattress. And one weekend, my roommate found it, and I think she wondered what I really did on the weekends with all this cash, but I couldn't tell her, it's not what you're thinking, it really is just because I can't open a bank account. Eventually, I saved enough money to buy a car, which was amazing, and I could finally drive, and I didn't have to worry about carrying all this cash in a Greyhound bus. But every single time I got behind the wheel of my car, I was breaking the law, because I didn't have a valid driver's license. So driving without a license meant that if I got pulled over, the consequence wasn't, I'm going to get a ticket. The consequence was, I can get deported. There are only 10 states in the US that allow undocumented people to drive. 10 states plus DC and Puerto Rico that allow undocumented people to drive. Everywhere else in the country, undocumented people still drive. We still drive to go to work and to go to school and to drop off our kids at school, but we do it without a driver's license, which frankly, I think makes the roads less safe for everyone. Because when you're driving with that fear in your mind, you're not necessarily 100% focused on driving. Right? For me, when I was in college, I tried to almost, as they say, fake it until I made it, right? Like I think sometimes I think back and I think I was a little delusional, thinking that I could achieve all these things while being undocumented. But my mom also told me that in life you need two things to be successful. My mom is full of all these wisdoms, by the way, if you haven't. I refer to my mom a lot because she really is just a really amazing source of wisdom and has been a source of wisdom and inspiration in my life. And she told me that you need two things to be successful in life. You need preparation and you need opportunity. And preparation is 100% up to you. You decide how hard you want to work on your dreams. You decide how hard you want to study for that test so you make the A. That's up to you. You decide that. The opportunity part is sometimes not up to you. There are certain opportunities that you're not eligible for. There are certain opportunities that aren't open to you. But if you're not going to be able to take advantage of an opportunity, don't ever let it be because you didn't try hard enough. Don't ever let it be because you weren't ready for it. So I try to do the work on my side of the equation and putting in as much work as I could. And I remember my sophomore year in college, I saw this poster around campus that said that I could make $10,000 working on Wall Street for the summer. And I remember thinking, oh my God, $10,000. I had $5 in my bank account, so $10,000 seemed like the answer to all of my problems. Okay? So I developed this idea that I was gonna go work on Wall Street. That became my goal. I'm going to go work on Wall Street. Eventually, I got an internship at Goldman Sachs, and I went to work in New York City for 10 weeks, and at the end of the 10 weeks, I was given an offer to go back to work at Goldman Sachs full-time. And this is where I had a really hard decision to make, because remember, I'm still undocumented, right? And a lot of times I get asked this question, and the question I get asked is, why didn't you apply? Like, why didn't you just get in the line and apply to become a citizen? Well, the very simple answer to that question is that there isn't an application you can just fill out. You gotta qualify first. And there are very, very specific ways in which someone can become a permanent resident and eventually a citizen. You can become a citizen if, of course, if you were born in the country, you're a citizen. If your parents are US citizens, you can become a US citizen. Both of my parents were Mexican citizens, and remember, they went back and were living in Mexico. Another way that you can become a US citizen is if you marry someone who is a US citizen. And there are some complications there, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You can have a very highly specialized job, like a very specific type of engineering job, or if you speak a language that the government needs help translating. Those kinds of very specialized jobs. And then another way is if there are special visas called U visas. So if you're a victim of a crime, you can qualify. You can qualify for protection that way as well. I luckily, thank God, never had a crime committed against me. So I didn't qualify for any of these ways to become a citizen. So the reason undocumented people don't become citizens, the reason we don't apply, the reason we don't just get in a line is because the line doesn't exist. There is no line that we can just get on and wait. If there was a line, I promise you that I would have gotten on that line a long, long time ago. So I didn't qualify to get any kind of status. I didn't qualify to get any kind of legal documents and legal documents to work legally in the country. So my options were, what do? I really want to go work in New York City. And it's just not just a matter of wanting to go work in New York City for Goldman Sachs. It's really a matter of survival. I have to make money. When I graduate, I have to have a job. Right? My family is depending on me. So what do? I went out and I bought a fake Social Security card and a fake green card. And this is a part of the story where I see well, I can't really see you guys because it's dark out there. But when I can see people, this is a time when people's eyebrows get really big. And I understand that because I think this is a part of the story where people want to be understanding. And at the same time, you think, we're a country of laws. You have to follow the law. And I understand that. There are laws. But the law and what's just and justice have never really been the same. In fact, I think that many times the laws have to catch up to what is just. When I think about the things that have been legal or illegal in our country, I can very easily see that. Not that long ago, it was illegal to marry someone of a different race. Women didn't have the right to vote. It was legal to own people. So I had to make a decision. I was 20 years old when I bought these papers. And by the way, I wish that I never had to do that, because there are consequences to every decision that you make. And there were a lot of consequences for me making that decision. But at that time, to me, it really was the only decision that I could make. So off I went to New York City, and I didn't know, by the way, if these papers were gonna work or not, right? Like, I had no idea, but I had to try. And that first day of work at Goldman Sachs, and if you read the book, this was one of the hardest stories to write about, because putting myself back in that office, putting myself back with those papers, giving them to HR, it's really indescribable, the amount of fear that I felt. It was fear that I could almost taste, because I didn't know what was going to happen. Somehow these papers worked, and I started work at Goldman Sachs as an analyst in 2005. I worked really hard, and eventually I became a vice president at Goldman Sachs when I was 27 years old. And when I was 27, I think you could say I had everything. I had an amazing career. I made a ton of money working on Wall Street. I had a boyfriend that could dance. I mean, I had everything, okay? And then I got a phone call that really changed my life and why I do the work that I do now. In 2007, my dad got really sick, and he was living in Mexico. And I was again faced with a very difficult decision. What do I do? Do I get on a plane and do I go see my dad? But if I do that, how am I gonna come back? Because I don't have a visa anymore. I don't have a passport anymore. This time I would have had to cross the border illegally to get back into the country. But if I don't go, am I ever gonna forgive myself if something happens to my dad? And that day, I bought a plane ticket, I packed a bag, I was on my way to the airport, I came back to my apartment. I was torn. It was an impossible decision to make. And in the hours of agonizing over this decision, my dad passed away. And I never got to see him alive again. And it's been 10 years, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't wish I had made a different decision. And I wish I could tell you that I'm the only person who's ever had to face that situation. But every day, undocumented people are faced with impossible decisions and impossible situations. In fact, right now, there are 800,000 young people whose lives are already being turned upside down, who, if we don't do something, will find themselves having to make these impossible decisions. In 2012, a program called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, Daca, was implemented. And what this program did, it did two things. It allowed people who came to the country when they were young, when they were little, through no choice of their own. And I say choice and not fault, because I can never blame my parents for wanting to give me a better life. But it is true that I didn't have a choice in the matter. When you're 11, you do what your parents tell you. I know we're in church, but when I was little, my parents told me to go to Sunday school, and I didn't want to go, but I went. You do what your parents tell you when you're little. So this program allowed young people who came here through no choice of their own, who passed a background check, et cetera, it allowed them to get a work permit for 2 years, and it protected them from deportation. And this work permit is something that they could reapply, so every 2 years they can get a new work permit. And that's all the program did, those two things: protected people from deportation, and it gave them a work permit. I know maybe you heard about it in the news as amnesty. And I wish it had been amnesty, but it wasn't, because it didn't provide a path to citizenship. It was a temporary solution to a permanent problem. But these young people, since 2012, have been able to go to school, they've been able to go to work, they've bought cars, some of them have become homeowners, 6% of them have opened businesses. They have figured out a way to thrive and live their lives. Some of them have become teachers and lawyers, and others have a GED and they make ends meet and they provide for their families. And all of their dreams matter. Well, on September 5th of this year, the current administration chose to end the program. And they gave this deadline of March 5th. So on March 6th, 1,400 people will lose, their permit will expire, and they will lose their ability to go to work and to drive because they'll have to give back their driver's licenses that are tied to their Daca status. They won't be able to go to school. If they work to pay for school, well, then they won't be able to do that anymore because they can't work. That'll happen on March 6th. On March 7th, another 1,400 people that will happen to. On March 8th, another 1,400 people. And every single day after March 5th, every single day, 1,400 people will lose their ability to go to work and to drive and to go to school and to provide for their families. That's going to happen unless we do something about it. And it really breaks my heart to say this because, I was 18 years old, a freshman in college in 2001, when the DREAM Act was first introduced. And if you've been listening to the news recently, I'm sure you've heard that word, the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act was essentially it was a legislative solution. It was, if it would have been enacted, it would have been the law that young people who came here through no fault of their own, who were here when that happened, could get into a path to citizenship. And it was going to be a 10-year-long process. But I really wish every day that that bill had passed because I would have been able to go to work at Goldman Sachs with real papers. I would have been able to get on a plane to go see my dad when he passed away. But the DREAM Act has failed again and again and again, and it's failed because in 2010, 5 Democrats voted against it, and it's failed because Republicans have voted against it. So this is really beyond a Republican versus Democrat thing. This isn't a political thing, although it feels like it becomes this very political thing, and the wager is young people's lives. But here we are now on 2017, and we can actually do something about it so that these people who have worked really hard and who have earned it can continue to live their lives. I think a lot of the reason why the conversation that we have about immigrants and about undocumented immigrants tends to be so negative sometimes. I really believe that so much of it has to do with how we talk about immigration and how we talk about immigrants. When you call someone who's undocumented and illegal, or you call them an illegal alien, you take away their humanity. You take away your ability to see them as people. They're no longer people, they're this illegal thing. And the only time that we use this word illegal, by the way, is to refer to people who have broken the law, the immigration law. People say, well, I use the word illegal because you broke the law. You're an illegal. Well, we don't ever call people an illegal who go above the speed limit. We don't call college students illegals when we all use a fake ID to go get a drink before we're 21. I know none of you guys do that in the audience. And parents, I know your kids don't do that ever, I know. But some of us did. Some of us used a fake ID to go get a drink. It's the same thing, really. We were breaking the law, but why we don't use that word illegal? We only use that word illegal to refer to people who break the immigration law. And I think we do that very intentionally because it puts them in this other category. I want to show you some clips, and they might make you uncomfortable, and if they do, we can talk about it in the Q&A. I've lost my cursor on this computer. Oh, there it is. Can you guys tell me when that says like 40? Well, no? What does that say? This is going to be hard. Okay, how about there? Perfect. Thank you. This is teamwork.
And this is the part where I'm showing you a bunch of awful foxes. Trust me when I say we have literally hours of this stuff. Okay, go.
A crisis on our southern border, waves of illegal immigrants posing financial, public health, and law enforcement risks to the U.S.
Hundreds, thousands of bad people have entered the USA.
We don't know if they're criminals or fugitives or terrorists. Sadly, people are murdered all the time by illegals.
It's not just crime that occurs and then they don't deport the criminal. It's also disease.
Allowing millions more low-wage workers to work legally in the United States will depress wages for working Americans.
Donald Trump's not going to let illegal aliens come to the country and murder our women.
All immigration should stop till we know what the heck is coming into our country. How many more of these terrorists are coming into our country?
Fox News has spent years telling viewers that immigrants are taking their jobs, committing crime, and spreading disease. See this clip of people jumping a border fence? Fox constantly reruns footage like this when talking about immigration. So viewers get the impression that immigrants are literally pouring into the country. And it's not just Fox. Listen to talk radio like Rush Limbaugh, and you hear the same thing.
These illegal immigrants are now drug mules. That the drug cartels are in charge of illegal immigration and they're all packing heroin.
Here's the thing. Americans have always been pretty nervous about immigrants, but it has.
Okay, the rest of the clip is a little political, and I'm not here to talk to you about politics, but if you are interested in seeing the rest of the clip and the beginning of the clip that I didn't show you, you can very easily find it on MediaMatters.org. It's a very interesting rest of the clip. And if any of this images made you uncomfortable, by the way, I've shown this clip dozens of times, and every time I hear it, it still makes my skin crawl because of the things that are being said about people. But I think you can see that if all we're watching is these kinds of images, and this is the only thing that is framing our perception of undocumented immigrants, then it's easy to see why so many people have such negative connotation of immigrants. I mean, before I came to live in this country, as I said, I had a specific idea of who Americans were. And a lot of that perception came from what I watched on television. And still today, it's the same thing. What we watch on television, whether it's the news or in television shows or in movies, what we hear on the radio, it impacts our perception, whether we want it to or not. Whether it's a conscious decision that we make to think of people this way, or it's an unconscious bias that we have. We're all impacted by it. I was very fortunate, and I always tell people that my story has a good ending. My story has a happy ending. When this happened with my dad, I was dating someone, as I said, and I finally told him my entire story. I said, you know, everything I've told you guys in the last 30 minutes, I told him in 5 minutes, so you can imagine how fast I was talking. And we were sitting in my bed, and a couple days later, he says, why don't we get married? And I thought to myself, this better not be how he's proposing. But it was. And you know, we were in love, and if we didn't get married, I was pretty much going to go back to Mexico because I started thinking, what's the point of being in this beautiful country and what's the point of making all this money if I can't even get on a plane to go see my dad when he's dying? What's the point of living in this beautiful country when I can't even go to a bar to get a drink without being scared that somebody's going to ask me, where's my driver's license? So we got married, and that's how I was able to become an American citizen. And I want to say this is what I was saying earlier about the complications. The reason I was able to fix my immigration status after marrying a US citizen is because I didn't cross the border illegally. I came here on a visa. But to me, that's pretty arbitrary, how I got here. People who cross the border illegally, even if they marry a US citizen, even if they have US citizen-born children, they many times still cannot adjust their immigration status. There is what's called a 10-year ban, which basically means and says that if you've been in the country undocumented for longer than a year, so if you've been undocumented for more than 1 year, and you're trying to adjust your status, or anytime you leave the country, you can't come back for 10 years. So imagine marrying someone, and in order for them to become citizens, they have to leave for 10 years, and they're not allowed back into the country for 10 years. And these are the choices that we give people. But my personal story is a happy story. The marriage didn't work out, and that's okay, because this proposal that I got like a month ago in Paris, it was amazing, and you can check out all the pictures on the gram. Thank you. And I really do feel like I have everything again. And I have to say that the reason I do this work is because I woke up one day and I realized that I had a lot of privilege. I know that I was undocumented, and it might seem hard that anyone who's undocumented can have privilege, but I really did, because I had resources, and I had a powerful story to share that I hope gets people to ask themselves one more question before they make a determination on how they feel about this issue of immigration. And I hope that what I have done here tonight is I'm not trying to change your mind around this issue. I'm simply trying to give you more information about what really happens when you're undocumented and the difficulties that you face and why you come to this country. I often think about this idea that immigrants come to the US to get on welfare and to suck the system dry. But I think, who in their right mind, I don't think anybody in this room would cross a border, walk through a desert, risk their lives, leave their family behind, leave their land behind, their food behind, their language behind. Who would leave all of that behind just to come get by? If all we wanted to do was to just get by, we would have stayed where we were. That's not why we come here. We're here to give a better life to our families. We're here to give of our talents to make this country better. And that's why we're here. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope you guys have lots of questions. I think there are some microphones at each end. So if you have a question, just come up to a microphone. It is possible that I did such an amazing job that you guys don't have questions, but I'm pretty sure that at least one of you has a question. Don't be shy. I won't be offended by any question you ask.
Hi, Kaylee Moreno from Ferris State University Center for Latino Studies. I read your book. It was absolutely amazing, and I share many of the excerpts with a number of our students, just looking for hope and continuing on, and also just the perseverance that you shared through your book. One of the questions that I have is, I work with a number of undocumented students every day in our office. What messages would you send to them in this time? And what messages would you have or advice for us that are allies, for undocumented students or undocumented people, as we continue to go through this current political climate and whatever political climates we continue to be in?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I would say that if you're an ally and you want to help, the number one thing that you can do right now is to call your congresswoman, your congressman, your senator, and tell them to support the DREAM Act. I mean, I was in DC last week. I was in DC all week long talking to House Republicans about the need to pass the DREAM Act, because we have to talk to each other, and we need Republicans and we need Democrats, we need everybody to get on board to pass a solution for the dreamers. And so the number one thing you can do, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, the number one thing you can do is to pick up the phone tomorrow and call your congressman, call your congresswoman, call your senator, and tell them you want them to support the DREAM Act before the end of the year. Because if it doesn't happen before the end of the year, I'm not really sure what next year is going to look like for a lot of people. So that really is the number one thing you can do. In terms of the advice that I like to share with young people, with dreamers, with Daca recipients, but really I think it's a message for young people, is that no matter what happens, no matter what your circumstances are, there's always a way, and there's always a solution. And at one point in my journey, I really started thinking, what's the worst that can happen if I get deported? And I thought, I'm not going to die. I'm very fortunate to be able to say that, by the way, because there are people who, if they face deportation and they're deported to very dangerous places, they can actually face death. And that's not an exaggeration, like that's a real thing, right? But a lot of us, like we're always going to find a way. That's what really inspires me about the spirit of undocumented immigrants, is that here you are with a country that's constantly reminding you that they don't want you here. Everything we do is difficult. Everything, literally every single thing we have to do is way more difficult. And for some reason, something in our spirit drives us to keep pushing forward and to keep going. So we have to remind people that that spirit and that attitude, that can-do, will-do attitude, has gotten them this far. And no matter what political climate we're in, no matter who's in the White House, no matter what Fox News is saying about us, we know who we are, we know why we're here, and we have to let that spirit continue to drive us forward. More questions? No? Oh, I think we have a couple more. Okay, great.
You were speaking at the beginning about not seeing Latinos in movies and TV. How do you change a profit-driven business when they think that they're making the proper money now, the proper profits?
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting about that is that Latinos as a group are how do I frame this? Latinos go watch movies more than any other group of people. Like, we account for something like 20% of the tickets that are bought at movie theaters every year. So it is about getting an industry to realize that they need to be more diverse. But frankly, it's also about us recognizing that we have the power of our pocket. And if we continue to go watch movies that don't represent us, they're going to keep making those movies because they're not going to get the message. Right? At the same time, when there are movies and television shows that portray us in an appropriate way, we have to support them. And I think a lot of times, and this is a thing that happens in the Latino community. There was a show called Cristela. I don't know if people here watched it, but there was this television show called Cristela, and it was about a Latina woman who was a lawyer, an aspiring lawyer. And she's Mexican-American, grew up in South Texas. And so her show represented her experiences as a Latina woman. Well, then a lot of Latinos came out and criticized the show and said, that's not my experience as a Latina. That's not how things were where I grew up. Well, since when does one Latina story represent all of the stories? I mean, I don't remember any white people watching Friends and saying, that's not my experience. Like, everybody loved that show, right? And so we also have to realize in our community that we have to be more supportive of those types of television shows and movies, and we also can boycott things that don't represent us well. We can also not go watch things that are offensive and that do a lot of harm to the perception of who we are. I forgot to mention this, but I am really excited that my book is currently being developed as a television series at Fox with producer America Ferrera. And the thing that I'm really, thank you, but what really gets me excited about that is that I don't view this television series as a Latino show. I view this show as a show whose lead actress will be a Latina. And it doesn't have to be coined as a Latino show because it's just an American story, right? So to answer your question more directly, we have to support more of the television shows, the kind that we want to watch, that represent all people the way that we should be represented. And two, we have to keep reminding Hollywood executives that we aren't gonna watch garbage they put out that keeps showing us in one single way. And we can do that by not buying those movie tickets. Yes.
I don't know if I misunderstood you, but I thought you said you came on a visa and you came by an airplane.
I did.
And what was it that stopped you when the visa ran out to apply for another visa or to extend that visa?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. So let's see, where do I start? So when I came here, I came on a tourist visa, and I went to school with a tourist visa, which was already not what you were supposed to do, even though I went to private school. So it's not like I was going to a public school funded by taxpayers, even though my parents were taxpayers, but that's another story. So I was already in violation of that visa at 11 years old. And also my parents' financial circumstances changed dramatically when a truck full of silver that they imported, sterling silver, got stolen in Laredo, Texas, so on this side of the border in the United States. $100,000 worth of sterling silver was gone, and that changed my parents' life and my life dramatically and drastically. When you are an immigrant from Mexico, I can't speak for every other country, but from Mexico, you have to have a certain level of financial resources to even get a visa at all. So when we got our tourist visas at the beginning, my parents did have those kinds of financial resources. When my visa expired, they did not anymore. So the risk they would take if we went back to Mexico to try to get me another visa, the very real risk was that it wouldn't get approved, and then I wouldn't be able to be with my parents in the US. So that's why. No, my parents' visas did not expire when mine did. They had longer expirations on them. And that's, those are all the complications of the immigration system, but that's why personally, my visa didn't get renewed. Other questions? One more question?
Right here.
Hi.
You did a wonderful job tonight, by the way.
Thank you.
I think we all know that. I don't know if this will be a tough one personally or not, but how did you react when certain persons calling Mexicans criminals and rapists? How do you respond to that, and how do you and your friends respond to that kind of hideous kind of comment?
You know, so it's interesting. So I don't know if you guys remember this, but I think it was during the vice presidential debate when the vice president said, and we have to stop with that Mexican thing, meaning we have to stop referring to the president's comments about Mexicans. And so I actually have a necklace, this one that I'm wearing tonight, that says that Mexican thing. And I take my Mexican thing everywhere I go. I took it to vote too. You know, I do feel like we have just like, I don't really even know what to say to being called a rapist and a criminal. And this, I wrote an opinion piece for Refinery 29 about the bad hombres comment. And I said, if we're talking, the bad hombres in my life have been my dad, who I adore, my brother, who just graduated from college, and Fernando, my fiance, who is the most wonderful man I've ever met in my life. And so I just had to take it with a grain of salt and say, I know that that's not true and it's not real, and I know how harmful it can be. And so that's why I go around the country doing these kinds of talks to dispel those myths that we're rapists and criminals, because we're not. And I really don't know what else to say to it, because I'm so tired of him.
It's so outrageous that you can abstract yourself away from that, or does it still have the power of personal damage?
It's enraging. I mean, the day that it happened, I was outraged and I was angry, and the day he got elected, I couldn't believe it. Like, I couldn't believe that someone who said those things about Mexicans and about the Latino community, but then he also did all sorts of other awful things, right? Like, we all saw the Hollywood Reporter video and comments that he made about women. And so I'm puzzled that, I mean, every day when I wake up and I look at my Twitter feed, I continue to be puzzled. And so we just have to do better next time, right? Like the next the elections that we have coming up in 2018 and the elections in 2020, Michigan, you have to do better next time.
Thank you very much.
I'm blaming it on you. No,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Well, one more.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. Hi, Carlos Sanchez. Thank you for being here. As I'm thinking of what you just said, so you have you said you're tired of this, so it shows passion, right? We are passionate about this. It gets to us very deeply. How can you be talking to representatives of any party and keep, I assume, cool, calm, collected, to make a point? How to balance that, be passionate about an issue, but also to be able to convey with some sort of professionalism will to a representative, so the message gets across and not lost in the just passionate about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Listen, I've read a lot of books about negotiation, and I did not read The Art of the Deal. I know you guys were wondering. But I have read a lot of books, and I recommend this book to everyone. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I talk about the impact that book had in my life in my book. But I think, I think that if you go into a meeting where you're trying to get someone to support you, to be supportive of the work you're doing, you can't go in there and tell them everything they're doing wrong. Right? Like, I do think that we sometimes go about these conversations, not just about immigration, but about a lot of issues. We go about them wrong, right? If nobody wants to sit there and listen, you're a racist and you're a horrible human. Like, I'm sorry, if somebody called me that, it would absolutely immediately shut me down. Because how am I any better if I'm labeling someone a racist than when somebody labels me a criminal and a rapist? I'm not any better if I do that, right? And there are real concerns that people have. There are legitimate security concerns that people have that really get lost because of the way that we frame it, right? So when I go into these meetings, I'm there to listen to their concerns, why they haven't gotten on a bill, and then to share some factual information that they have wrong. And sometimes, by the way, they know the information and they just choose not to listen to it, so it's good to remind them of that information. It was interesting to me that the majority of the people I met with didn't really know the numbers, like this 1,400 people every single day, and everyone's thinking like the deadline is March 5th. But really the deadline is the end of the year, because if something does pass, it's going to take months for USCIS to start processing permits and start processing this hopefully new path to citizenship for young undocumented people. It's going to take time. So if your permit expires on March 6th and the law passes on March 5th, you're going to be out of luck for months, right? So it was really about, and I think in any kind of conversation that we have where we're trying to come to a solution, it's also understanding that you have to listen to what the other person has to say. And you really have to genuinely be willing to listen and be willing to take their concerns into consideration, right? And I think that that's, to me, that's not only the smart way to approach it if you want to actually get people on your side. Like I remember, you didn't ask about this, but I remember when I was working at Goldman, you know, and I talked about my salary negotiations, and a lot of people don't do that. Like a lot of people don't go to their bosses and say like, what's up, what's my bonus gonna look like this year, right? And you have to do it in a certain way. You can't be in there and be like, I need to get paid more money, right? Like you gotta work to it. So that's just like how I like to approach those types of conversations. But I also do think that, you know, you have to be yourself, and I am a very passionate person about these issues, and I have to let that come across, and I think that's a good thing that it comes across, but it's got to come across at the right times when you're having those conversations. Yeah. Okay, one more.
Thank you for coming today. So my question is, what are some organizations that we can volunteer with to show our support?
Yeah, thank you. So there are a few organizations. There is the National Immigration Law Center, which I'm a board member of, and they're a really great organization. Locally, I think you guys might have a chapter of United We Dream. That's a youth-led organization, and they do a lot of local work and local organizing. There's also forward.us that they might also have people locally. Those are the three that I can think of right now. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be out front. Thank you.